Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Particularly Innovative, where we talk about the future of DeFi, decentralized technology, interoperability, and all things blockchain. I'm pleased to be joined here today by Luke Lim, who is the head of go-to-market strategy for Chainlink. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show today, and excited to really dive into some questions here about the future of decentralized tech with you.
Likewise, GM. It's been a pleasure to be here. And then, yeah, happy to dig into CCIP, what we're doing across that, but also the wider collaboration that we have with charged particles as well.
Yeah, sure. So, from the beginning of charged particles, we've always really believed in a chain agnostic, multi-chain future, and over the years, we're seeing that become more and more materialized as the way things are growing, which is really exciting. And we got to use CCIP, or the cross-chain interoperability protocol, as we deployed our Web3 packs to the Mode blockchain, and I can speak on behalf of our dev team that it was really like quite a pleasure, and our devs were really impressed with the technology, and I think inspired by what it enables to be possible. So just to get started, for those who maybe are newer to the space, or even just hadn't heard of CCIP before, could you just give us a brief rundown and an overview of both Chainlink as well as what CCIP is?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. Chainlink we started off as providing decentralized or using the decentralized Oracle network technology to provide like connections between the blockchain world and any form of data that's off-chain, right? So you can think of it as a connective tissue with the secure blockchain environment, but blockchain environments don't speak to one another, right? So within, let's say, Ethereum, right, the nodes do not know exactly even things like what time is it, right? Because there's no concept of time in blockchains. If you want to basically do things like parametric insurance, you want to do DeFi, you want to do NFT lending, etc., you would typically always need connectivity or data sources, data coming out from the outside world, and plug it into the blockchain. Back in the day, I think one of the first product market fit in blockchains was DeFi. And we have seen a huge need to basically get crypto prices, right? So that DeFi protocols, lending protocols in general, can actually accurately price the value of the collateral. Previously, before Chainlink came in to provide that service, you have the likes of Uniswap, right? All the different AMMs, and folks were using what we term as time weighted average price, right, of whatever the price of a cryptocurrency asset that's traded on chain. The problem with that approach is that it's highly insecure because it leads to, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but it leads to what we term as a flash loan attack, right, where funds can be lost. That's the first product market fit of where Chainlink came in. We see a huge need given the amount of hacks that have been in the space, and we created what we term as data feeds, right? So aggregating various different sources of where the exchanges are, be it centralized exchange, decentralized exchange, consolidate them, right? And not just having a single entity publish that data on chain, but you would need basically a decentralized Oracle network where there's dozens of different node operators. They all have to come into consensus what that price would be, and then write that on chain. So it's basically, you can think of it as a secure, decentralized connective tissue of node operators that writes data on a blockchain, right? And tells you the events of what's happening around the world. That's what we started off with, right? Mm-hmm. There's obviously a whole spectrum. I mean, different blockchain use cases has expanded since 5 years ago. Now we see that there's not just Ethereum. Hey, there is basically the likes of other different L2s, other different L1s, etc. And our goal here is, okay, now there's a lot more builders across all of these chains and different type of users across the different chains, right? So how do we then connect them together? And that's really where we come in to provide different type of use cases. Our core primary focus is more so on builders and what do they need. So we first then came up with things like computation. You want to do more complex functionalities on the blockchain. Blockchain environments are not very suited for high computation load. right? So that's where we have things like automation, right? Where you can do computation off chain, right? And then write that data on chain. With automation, you can do things like time-based automation triggers, right? Or custom logic. So I'll give a very simple example. Let's say you want to do limit orders, right? Limit buy orders on a particular transaction. Let's say I want to buy Bitcoin at $100 worth of Bitcoin every single day, right? So you'll be a time-based trigger instead of manually doing it or yourself, right? Or having developers pulling up like centralized scripts. You can actually do what we term as training automation, right? To actually automate these transactions on a regular basis, right? And then that's where we come into the cross-chain world. What it is now, I think there's like hundreds of different chains. How exactly then do you connect each other? And we see a lot of fragmentation across the different chains. One of the key reasons why we focus on this is also given the number of hacks that we have seen, right? I think there's over $3 billion worth of hacks that we have encountered over the past 2 to 3 years. That's a huge amount of funds, right? And what we have seen is that with every single hack, it pulls back our adoption in the crypto space by dozens of years, right? And that's really where we see if we want blockchains to be heavily used, there needs to be a secure underlying architecture that enables builders to build on top of which so that hacks do not occur. That's why we have spent 3 years building out what we term as CCIP. It's actually a short form acronym for Cross-Chain Interoperability Protocol. What it does is it uses the same underlying technology of what we have, what we term as a decentralized Oracle network. They come into consensus of the state on one chain, right? Before writing that state, writing whatever transactions to be initiated on the destination chain. So let's say it can be bridging of tokens, it can be message passing. So if you want to send like messages across from one chain to the other, it could be that. But it could also be like, let's say NFT transfers, right? Fungible token transfers, opens up a wide range.
Yeah, right. So you've given us a wonderful timeline to work with there, and showing the evolution of Chainlink, over the last 5 years, and having built CCIP for 3 years now, and looking really forward into the future and trying to limit the amount of time it takes to get much more global adoption. And so for a team like yours that's, really thinking big picture and long term, I'd love to get some of your insight into how you see the space evolving over the next handful of years. It's obviously really difficult to make predictions, 5 years or 10 years away in such a rapidly developing space, but perhaps you have some thoughts there as well. How do you envision CCIP specifically, influencing the blockchain landscape in the next handful of years? And then perhaps you could give us some broader context or predictions, for the change of the whole space, maybe in the medium to longer term.
100%. I think it has been what 6 years since Ethereum with smart contract platforms on blockchains started, right? However, I would still say that we are in a very early innings of which, right? There's a lot of building blocks that have been built in terms of enabling the wider breadth of use cases to be built on the blockchain and a wider audience, right? A wider user base. Right now, if you look at number of users, active users on blockchains itself, I would still say it's within the single digit millions, right? And that's not even accounting for the really active, daily active users, right? I'm talking about probably like the monthly active users on the end. So we see a huge potential. In other words, we are very early, right? There's a lot more that we can do with blockchains that previously weren't suitable, right? Given the constraints of, let's say, like the throughput rate of a particular given chain, the technologies that enable connectivity between different systems, be it on-chain systems and off-chain systems. And that's what we're really trying to do here. In the next 5 years, 10 years, we actually see a huge influx of number one, capital, number two, different use cases, and number three, user base, right? These three come together. That's really what I think would grow the entire space. There's something that actually Vitalik spoke about, basically in conferences, but also very recently in a Twitter thread that he shared, where he was talking about the circular economy of blockchain systems right now in terms of the use cases. DeFi is great. I'm a huge believer in DeFi, but I would still say that if you want DeFi to be widely adopted across the wider group, you need things like real world asset tokenization. So I'll give an example. Look at the biggest market cap of the biggest assets right now. Stable coins by far has the biggest market caps, right? As a sector. And stablecoins, what is stablecoins? Stablecoins is effectively tokenized versions of like T-bills, reserve of bank balances that they have, right, across. So, and we have seen a huge adoption on the end. So there's definitely like a product market fit on that side. And we do see that there's a whole wave of different tokenization of different real world assets to be coming into the space. We have seen that with institutions coming in, right? Financial institutions like banks, right? But also telecommunication players, etc. And they have been in the space for a long time. And one of the key things that we have been seeing is that right now they have put a lot more emphasis, right, in terms of resources to really have production use cases on chain. Previously, there was a lot of testing use cases. And now with that, we have been, like you might have seen our work alongside with capital markets. We have worked alongside with the likes of Swift, right, that powers basically any form of international transfers and bank transfers across the tens of thousands of different banks around the world, right? Swift is a critical underlying architecture, and we are working alongside with them. Similarly, DTCC, which is a clearinghouse for every single US securities, right? They're also looking at how best to optimize, right? And basically use the blockchain technology in a secure way, right? So we are working alongside with them as well, with different financial institutions. What the key thing of what we have been working alongside and seeing for that is that there will be this basically financial institutions, they would tokenize real world assets. They would first start off with having their own private chains, right? So right now, most of the chains that we see now are all public chains. These chains, I'll give an example. Let's say you have like ANZ, right? Bank. They will create their own private chain. You have Bank B, they will create their own private chain as well. But they need to interact with one another. And they will also need a neutral ground, like public chains, where can come as a middle ground for transactions to occur. So part of our work alongside with them, one of their key needs is, hey, first and foremost, I need support on my chain. How do I connect my chain to the wider ecosystem out there? That's really where CCIP comes in, right? Because back to my initial point, CCIP is both a messaging and token transfer protocol. So it enables different chains to talk to one another. So let's say if I want to make a transaction on chain A to chain B, right? You can use CCIP for that, right? And that's really where we fit in very nicely. And our wider vision is CCIP will connect with hundreds and thousands of different chains, right? And everything will be abstracted from the end user perspective, right? So very similar to how our current financial system works, right? If I were to transfer funds from bank A to bank B, I do not need to know what happens under the hood, right? Each bank has its own ledger of transactions, right? I just see that my funds appeared in like another person's account in bank B, right? Very similar to this particular use case, what we want to do is we want to make user-friendly, enable developers and builders to make user-friendly applications.
Great. Yeah. So, you're reiterating what some other folks on this show have said in the past, as well as that, we're going to be seeing a lot of new capital coming in from the traditional finance world and the blending of TradFi and DeFi, as a road towards more adoption and ubiquity of blockchain technology. And so in the context of that, especially with things like private chains and public chains and cross-chain, efficiency, like how do you see Chainlink contributing to, balancing decentralization and security and cross-chain communication with all of this sort of new interaction between those two spaces in the coming years?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the key things, back to my first point, the reason why we created or why we developed CCIP and we spent 3 years of development for it, right? The key reason for that is because of the hacks that we have seen in the space, And there's obviously a huge need. We want to prevent any form of such hex instances, right, or exploits to happen in the space. Very similar to how before price feeds, Chainlink price feeds was widely adopted, there was a lot of different instances where funds has been lost through flash loan attacks, etc. You hardly ever see it now, given when they use Chainlink price feeds. Similarly for CCIP. And then to your point, right? How do we, what's our priority here? Obviously, our priority is first and foremost security and decentralization. I don't think we can ever take shortcuts on the end, right? Solely because if, let's say, you just need a tail end risk of something occurring, right? And that would then jeopardize the entire system. So for us, it's always about, hey, how can we build a system that can facilitate trillions of dollars and quadrillions of dollars of transactions to flow through this system, right? And yet not have any issues, or there's no way for any single party to have any control, right, over this. And yet the network would still work as per intended. So that is not our number one priority, right? There's nothing else that would triumph because we, in our firm belief, if you really want long-term sustainable adoption in the space, you need to have very secure underlying architecture, and critical infrastructure can never go wrong. I think that's something that in this space, we are all about experimentations. It's great to experiment on the application layer. It's not great to experiment on the infrastructure layer when you want trillions of dollars to flow through this, right? And I think that's our entire belief within the space. How then can we then optimize to enable this to be scalable in the long run as well, right? So for us, it's about, hey, are we then able to better improve the product suite and modularize the components such that basically we can very quickly expand? Because as I mentioned, right, our goal is to expand to hundreds and thousands of different chains. I don't think the number of chains would necessarily slow down, given the fact that there will be private chains as well, right? So our core focus is then, how do you do it in a secure manner? You don't want to compromise security and decentralization. You still want a decentralized network, right, to come into consensus. If you are using a centralized operator for bridging, like, really, what's the point of them building CCIP if we go down that route? So that's our number one focus. And then, of course, we are doing a lot of work to optimize the scalability to connect with more and more chains, because that's something that cross-chain would need anyway.
Great. Yeah. So earlier you mentioned, like a few different use cases as related to real world assets and sort of the changing landscape in traditional finance. Another thing that people are speaking a lot about in terms of upcoming, maybe immediate sort of innovations is the interfacing between blockchain technology and AI technology. I wonder if Chainlink is thinking anything about that, or otherwise, are there other sort of transformative applications of blockchain that you anticipate outside of some of the things you've mentioned previously?
Yeah, there's a couple, right? Definitely blockchain and AI is a very interesting play and developments that we are closely watching. At the end of the day, I firmly believe this as well, right? Number one, in a philosophical sense, there's a need for AI to be decentralized, right? And that's really where the blockchain technology and crypto incentives come into play, because that will actually enable to bootstrap a network, right? And that's really the whole purpose. Once and you look at DeFi, right? If you want to build user-friendly applications, there's a couple of DeFi applications out there. Right now, I would say DeFi applications are still relatively more manual, right? You have new aggregators out there, but what's powering under the hood is that you have strategy managers that is deploying funds. Ideally, you want to come to an end state where, hey, it will be what we typically see as robo advisors, right? And that's really what would drive like wider adoption. Because if you ask folks, in terms of a financial use case, most people are not financially savvy, right? People don't really know how to, like, let's say, invest their funds. They want to basically have a trusted party that can basically come with a soft guarantee that this is basically the rate of return right? And basically we would then do transactions and strategies that will manage your risk accordingly, right? Right now it's human based. Where we see is that AI, this is just one of the use cases that AI can come in, right? The intersection between AI and DeFi, right?
Mhm.
Where you would use AI agents that taps into AI models under the hood, right? That basically then will come with the best strategies, be it on-chain opportunities or off-chain opportunities, right? And they will be the one that manages, not a human, right? Humans can basically set in parameters to do guidance, very similar to how you see like a traditional factory. Like if you have look at like how car factories are working right now, most of the manufacturing factories, everything is automated. Humans are still there, but they're more as observers, right? So I do think that that will be happening in the blockchain space. And where Chainlink then comes in, a couple of different folds. As there's more and more different AI agents within the space, the folks that you're interacting with is autonomous AI agents, right? And they would then need number one, still connectivity between different chains, right? So CCIP is definitely one there. The other is they would need basically like a secure underlying data,
Mm.
using the right data to make their decisions. If
Mm.
they're using like wrong data, then there's really, if something goes wrong, like who can, let's say, the end user go to, right? To find fault with, right? With an AI agent, it's very difficult to do that, especially in the blockchain environment where transactions are irreversible. And then the other part would be more so on the inference of the AI models, right? So if let's say you were to use like one AI model, and I don't think that would be ever the case, right? There will be situations where there's hallucinations, meaning there will be instances where they trigger actions that's actually not right. So you would still need the underlying secure, number one, secure data source to say, hey, if let's say my model ever hallucinates, gives me an answer that's totally out of whack, I compare it with, let's say, training price feeds. So I'll give an example, right? Let's say the model says, hey, Bitcoin at 60,000 is super undervalued. But right now, Bitcoin is at maybe 55,000 elsewhere. So, like, obviously, the model is hallucinating, is asking you to make a purchase, right? You would then compare it with, let's say, training price feeds, which has a global state of the price of the Bitcoin asset right now, right? And compare it and say, hey, there's no way that your model output is right, right? It means this model is hallucinating. So you can use training data sources or data feeds as a point of circuit breaker or secondary check to make sure that it prevents any form of hallucinations. So that's one. The other would be leveraging another tool of what we term as Chainlink functions, where you can use Chainlink decentralized Oracle network technology to come into consensus of various different AI models. So let's say instead of just relying on one AI model, I want 10 AI models to generate the output. And only if, let's say, 8 out of 10 models come with that same output, then okay, I will trigger a transaction and pass it through, right? And to do that, you would need a decentralized Oracle network technology to come into consensus of all these 8 different AI models before writing it on chain and triggering an on chain transaction. So there's a lot that we can play with. I think we are still in the very, very early innings
Mm.
of the different type of use cases of this particular intersection between AI and blockchain. This is only like one of the many, but I
Yeah.
do think there's going to be a whole wave of different use cases, but it's still out for innovators like yourself, right? Like us, right? To really come and make it a reality.
Yeah, I know this is something we're definitely thinking about a lot. Something you touched on there is that, for a new user, or for many people just in general, they don't really have the literacy to make educated financial decisions, especially in a DeFi space with all sorts of different complicated yield strategies and dozens of platforms across hundreds of chains. Where do you even begin? And so that's really where we are trying to find a fit for Web3 packs as a way to bundle different assets in a single transaction so that people can quickly onboard into lots of different kinds of strategies across chain. And so we used CCIP to bring our IONX token across to the mode ecosystem. And I know we've got lots of ideas about how else we can use this tool. So we're quite excited to be building at the on ramp for newer users as more of that traditional finance capital starts to change the space in the coming years. But as a final question for you, something I like to pose to all my guests here at the end is, is directed really at those new users, those people just getting started, and new to DeFi, maybe new to blockchain in general. What sort of advice you might give to that audience who's looking to understand and engage with this cross-chain world we're building?
Yeah, 100%. I think looking back at my initial learning journey and educational journey into this space, there's a lot happening within this space, and a lot of different sources, right? Crypto Twitter is a great resource, but it can be very cluttered at times and very noisy at times. I would say read various different books. For me, I'm more inclined on podcasts because I'm a more audio person, right? So there's a huge amount of different podcast materials out there. I would say that that is really how you would better understand the space, right? And of course, this space, there's a whole ton of different like use cases in different sectors. You have NFTs, you have DeFi, you have IP, and then of course the AI space as well. They're all very different, although they interact in some way or form, but they all have different innovations within the space. So I would say find the one that resonates the most with you. So if let's say you're a super financial geek, like me, let's say DeFi might be your thing. If let's say you are an artist coming into the space, NFTs might be your thing, right? Find the one that resonates with you the most. And then from there, take that step into learning a bit more in terms of how the technology is progressing and the use cases that is in. The other thing that I will also say it's there's only so much you can learn by listening to podcasts and materials and reading books. You probably have to experience it for yourself. So experimenting, interact with various different protocols, right? That's really the way that you would really better get your hands dirty, understand a lot more in the space, how things are working, before really interacting very heavily in things like DeFi and NFTs myself. I never understood. On a theoretical level, I never understood because so a bit of background myself. I live in Singapore, Sydney, and now I'm in London, right? So these are like first world countries, right? The financial system there is great, right? There's like it's not like in developing countries where you have a huge need for basically like blockchain because you're not banked, right? But however, once I started interacting with those protocols, that's when something clicked within me and say, hey, I really do see a future and a need for this in this entire world where you don't trust a single entity, right? And very similar to situations of what has happened with Robinhood, etc. I think those are examples, but it will not hit home until you start experimenting and know how DeFi actually works, how NFT DeFi works, and really how blockchains can actually be used as an underlying technology.
Indeed.
So get your hands dirty. That's
Yeah,
my point.
indeed. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining the show today. It's been wonderful to hear your insights, and we're really excited to work in parallel with Chainlink as much as possible in the next handful of years. And I appreciate your time and what you're building.
100%. Super excited as well, and we want to further deepen that relationship between us and explore use cases.
All right. Well, until next time, everybody, thanks for joining us.
Cheers.